Please help me welcome Loren Norris.
One of the most challenging questions I ever asked anybody as a leader, and most challenging question I've ever been asked as a leader. Well, they're the same question. You ready for the most challenging question? I bet you have a hard time with this one too. What do you want? That's what we're going to talk about in this episode of Leading Leaders.
Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom.
I'm Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast, and I can tell you as a leader, the first couple of times somebody asked me that question, what do you want? The first thing that came to my mind was a whole nother series of questions. Well, what do I want about what? What do I want for dinner? What do I want for new clothes? What do I want to drive? What do I want for a career? What do I want for an education? What do I want about this parking place we're arguing over? What do you want? Recently, I had a chance to listen to an interview between two men that I have followed for as long as I've known about them. One of those is Dr. Jordan Peterson. Dr. Jordan Peterson, a world-renowned psychologist, has been teaching and writing books for 3 decades, about as long as I've been studying leadership, but he's only come into my world of reference, my understanding, my knowledge base, in probably the last 10 years. He's been doing what he does a lot longer than that. Some of the content that Dr. Peterson focuses on is asking that same question. What do you want? In fact, one of his greatest works is an online course that you can take. It's not cheap, but apparently it really pays off. And it's called Future Authoring or Life Authoring. And this Life Authoring program walks you through a series of questions about as complicated as what do you want, but it gives you a framework to complete the format, the worksheets, the questionnaires, and life author exactly what you want out of your life. And it breaks life down into a lot of different categories, like your relational life, your career life, your education life. What will you do for hobbies? And it's really about a vision program. Now, I wrote a vision program probably 12, 14 years ago that it takes about 2 hours to go through it. And a lot of people get stuck in the process because they struggle with that question, what do you want? Now, the other guy in this same interview is a guy that many people know. I would probably say more people know of Tony Robbins than know of Jordan Peterson. But to hear the two of them converse and to listen to the genuine regard that they have for each other, the respect that they have for each other, the amount of authority that each man places on the other man is incredible. Not because they come from two different camps, but they do. But because they agree on so many things that are so powerful and palatable, especially when you ask that question, what do you want? And I think part of the challenge for the average person that I talk to, and I put myself in this same category, when you ask the question, what do you want? It immediately charges the question with emotion. Because life has told us you don't always get what you want. In fact, many of us grew up with our parents reminding us you don't always get what you want. You can want in one hand and in the other hand and see which one fills up faster. And the challenge with that mindset is that the question itself comes emotionally charged, and the ability to answer it is delayed or deferred by that emotional charge. Think for a moment about that conversation that many men have with their wife, spouse, sister, whatever, and say, what do you want for dinner? And the idea that there is a decision to be made causes stage fright. There's a bit of trepidation and fear that comes in just because they've been asked a question that demands a decision. That's a challenge. That can be a problem. And the result of that challenge, that problem, is that they step back and they suddenly limit the field of decisions and charge all those decisions with a deep emotion. Now, if you were to ask a 12-year-old, what do you want? The odds are that that 12-year-old has been thinking about something, male or female. They've been thinking about something that right now is at the top of their mind. And the reply is probably going to be short-term thinking, immediate response, not a whole lot of relegation. It's going to be whatever's at the top of their mind at the moment. If they're playing with a video game and you say, what do you want? They're probably going to say, I want to get to the next level. I want to stop dying here. I want to stop losing like this, because their level of intent is very immediate. It's right here. It's narrowly focused. And even though it is emotionally charged, the decision tree doesn't begin to consider all the other factors of time and cost and expense and pain and the impact it'll have on people around them. No, their question, answer is very immediate, usually very myopic. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is your judgment call. I will tell you, though, that the older we get in life, the more areas that we realize we have choices to make and decisions to follow and consequences that will follow those decisions that follow those choices. Then all of a sudden, we begin to get terrified of actually making a choice. And here's the really hard part, and this is, I have to be honest, I'm still getting my hands around this, trying to get my brain around this. But as I listen to the dialogue between Dr. Jordan Peterson, psychologist, authoring program, life authoring program is one of the most profound ways of shaping, and Tony Robbins, who says, I go through this exercise every single day for 10 minutes. And then he outlined his exercise, and I don't mean go to the gym and pump some iron, although that's part of his daily routine. I'm talking about the fact that he has a list of statements of future authored projections. He knows where he wants to go in every area. And in his own words, he said sometimes there's a project that we haven't even started yet. Listen closely here. This is the part I'm trying to get my head around. He said, I look at that project we have not started yet, and I tell my body, this is how it will feel when that project is completed at the best, highest, most productive, most excellent level. When it's done and it's all perfect. When it's done and we've gotten paid for it. When it's done and the client has got the result for it. When it's done, it's going to feel like, yes! And then I put myself in that state emotionally, knowing what that win will feel like. And I connect the doing of the project with the feeling of its completion. And I thought to myself, how would I know how it feels if I've never been there? How would I know what success feels like if I've never been successful? How would I know what it feels like to have $1 million in the bank and all the bills paid and not be terrified of the lights being cut off, the water being cut off, the car being repossessed? How would I know what that feels like if I've never been there? And there's some little twists and tricks in the background of that psychology that says, well, what did the last success feel like? And I think this is where a lot of us struggle. What do you want gets separated from what have you done? In the wrong way. But it doesn't get separated from what you've done in the good way. Here's what I mean. We have these little successes in life. They may be little. They may be small. They may be, I was trying to be a gold medalist in tennis. And after my 5th match, I realized tennis is not my game. I cannot move that fast. Okay, so you have this enormous fail in the world of tennis. If that was your lifelong dream and your lifelong goal and your lifelong ambition, you've just destroyed yourself because the goal that you set wasn't achievable by you. Whether it was realistic or unrealistic, I'll leave you to decide that. But you set a goal and you didn't achieve it, and so you have an emotional connection to the loss. Question is, how many other things in life have you set out to do and completed them? I remember when I finished my first book, one of my mentors at the time, Dr. Rob Brewer, who now has his PhD in education, was still working on it. He had his master's and was working on his program. And when I told him I finished my book, I'd love your opinion on it, he celebrated. He was like, "That's incredible. That's awesome." I'm like, "You haven't even read the book yet." He said, "No, I'm talking about the fact that you sat down and did the discipline necessary to finish the book." Now, I would love to say the book has sold 100 million copies and I'm sitting on the beach with my feet up and it's all good. No, it probably hadn't sold 10,000 copies. I wish it had, but it hasn't. So, which is my measure of success? That I accomplished the writing of the book? Now, 7. Or that I didn't sell 100 million copies? See where I'm going with this? See, we tend to look only at the big, giant goals and wins and go, that's success. And so we detach ourselves emotionally from the commitment necessary to get there when we miss one of those big goals. We see that big goal, we see it evaporate into nothing, and we think, well, I'm just going to go eat worms. I mean, why even bother? And we forget that along the way, the first page with the first words typed, that was a win. That was a success. It was a little bit fun, but it was a success. The first completed chapter, that's a pretty sizable success. Ask how many other people have written. I think in the total sum of what I've written, probably the first book was 30,000 words. The second one was almost 60. I have one that's 469 pages. I don't know what the word count is on that one. I have 3 others that are probably under 20,000 words each. But as you look at all that writing, there are many people who would say, well, if I tried to string together all the things I've ever thought, it might be 10,000 words. And there are others who would say, you've only written 7 books? I've had 52 bestsellers. I had an interview on my podcast with a lady who walked in and she had like a little suitcase with her. And she started stacking the books up on the table. And I said, this is going to take us forever to go through. Let's do this. Let's just stack up the ones that have been bestsellers. And she looked at the entire stack, and she took out 4. She took 4 books out of the entire stack. All the rest of them had achieved bestseller status. Wow. I'm not there. I have not made that level of accomplishment. I have not written that much content. I have not written any content, apparently, yet, that's worthy of an international bestseller. For her, out of 37 titles at that time, and this has been a couple of years ago, apparently 90% of what she writes is worthy of a bestseller. That's pretty impressive. I'm a little jealous. And if I'm crazy enough to compare, why do I even bother? That's a challenge all by itself. And see, do you see how that emotional positioning puts us back at the starting point of asking the question, what do you want? Well, I want to be an international bestseller. But I have this friend who has 40 international bestsellers, and I feel like an idiot trying to say I'm going to one day be an international bestseller. And we set ourselves against the emotional condition of that contrast and comparison, rather than setting ourselves against the emotional condition of what will it feel like when. If I had all 7 of my books as international bestsellers, I probably wouldn't be driving the old car that I drive. I would probably be living in a house big enough for all the kids and grandkids to come visit at once. with my own private lake to go fishing in. I don't even like to fish, but I would sit in a boat and stare at the water. If I had all those things, what would that feel like? I don't know. I've never had them. And that, for many people, is the rub. Here's the other side of that rub. If I had those things, would I feel guilty for having them when I know there are other people who don't? I was listening to a podcast this morning, Sean Ryan, and I don't know who the other guy was that he was talking to, but Sean Ryan made a comment that was very powerful and very palatable. Here's what he said. He said, I have a guy on my team right now who had spent 18 years in corporate America, and I recruited him away. And I don't pay him anywhere near what they were paying him. So you spent 18 years at a company, you were almost ready to retire, and you gave up your job to go work for somebody else paying you less money? What were you thinking? He said, the guy's been with me 2 years. And in the first year that he was there, I remember him saying, I wish I could get a raise, but I can't even buy my own home, so it doesn't really matter. And Sean Ryan looked at him and said, what do you mean you can't buy your own home? He's like, I just can't. He said, how many times have you been turned down for a mortgage? He said, I've never applied for a mortgage. He's like, then how do you know you can't buy your own home? And he said, in the conversation that ensued, I realized this gentleman had been brainwashed to believe that because of the color of the skin and where he grew up and the background that he had, that homeownership was not in his future. Not now, not ever, just not going to be there. It's not in the cards for you. And because his emotional attachment to the belief that he wasn't worthy to buy a home was so strong, he never got out of the gate to ask and be told no. It just never dawned on him that if I try, I might succeed. If I don't try, then I'm guaranteed to fail. That never crossed his mind. And so I want to challenge you as thinkers and leaders. What is that thing that you want? That you wanted all your life, perhaps. But you've never gone for it. You've never dove into that pool or run across that field because there's something in your feelings, in your emotions, in your previous history, in your own knowledge and experience that says, I can't do that. I'm not worthy of that. I'm not qualified for that. That's not in the cards for me. And so the feeling of that preempted failure causes you to not even try, to not even start. You don't even jump out of the gate because you're looking at it going, well, I'm just going to fail anyway. Why would I do that? And so you convince yourself. Think back to a couple episodes ago. We talked about the quit cycle. We fight for what we want, and then we miss the target. And we cry that we missed the target. And that's where the next decision comes up. Do we go back into fighting again so that we win what we want? Or do we move on to the next level and concede? It was never in the cards for me. And then we begin the process of convincing ourselves. We commiserate. We find other people around us. We join a community of other quitters. We get used to the idea that, well, I'll just never have a mortgage. I'll never own a new car. I'll never becomes the broken record that constructs our emotional relationship to winning. I sat next to a young lady yesterday. No, day before yesterday. And she said to me, now that this new president is in office, I'm just counting the days until I'm a slave again. Forget your political rhetoric. Ask yourself where a 9-year-old learned language like that. She was 9. She was bright. She was a brilliant little girl. She sat next to me in the video production booth, and in a matter of about 10 minutes, learned a 60 button computer controller that switches the cameras and tells them camera in which fade and which swipe and what's next and how do you test that camera and how do you zoom in and how do you zoom out. She learned the switcher and the remote control for the robot camera in about 10 minutes. In fact, she came back during one of the breaks, brought her little friend with her and said, can I sit in the booth and show her how all this works? And so as she was showing off her friend, wow, how did you do that? Wow, how did you do that? Wow, how did you do that? She's 9. She's brilliant. But somebody has planted a negative seed emotionally, logically, politically oriented in her little 9-year-old brain that caused the words to come out of her mouth. Now imagine how deep-seated they are in her emotions. Imagine what they mean in her mind of accomplishments. She said to me, I'm just counting the days until this new president makes us slaves again. What? What would even make you think that? Ironically, she was in a room of very accomplished women. One of the ones that I talked to had a PhD in psychology and a PhD in metaphysics. These are not unbright people. She's not surrounded by a community of people who are waiting for somebody to give them a handout. She's surrounded by a community of African women and African American women, some of them Americans who have African heritage, but they were born in America. And they'll tell you, I have the blue passport. I have no intention of leaving, but I do send my money and I do take myself back to Africa to re-educate some of these people whose worldview is twisted. It was a phenomenal space to be, but to hear a 9-year-old whose future is already tainted, like this gentleman with 18 years of success in corporate America who said, I'll never own a home. Wait, you should have had a home 18 years ago. If you've had a job in corporate America, a steady paycheck, there's nothing stopping you. But the challenge for all of us is we get this emotional grunge in ourselves about some of the most minuscule failures or the most unrealistic, lofty goals. Well, I didn't play in the Super Bowl, so I might as well just eat Doritos and become 700 pounds and die of heart disease. I know that seems like a drastic contrast, but if you've ever seen the movie Dodgeball, you see the depiction of this guy who gave up. He quit. He went from superstar athlete to barely alive. What do you want? We don't become a superstar athlete by sitting on the couch and acting like you're barely alive. You've got to make decisions that lead toward the success that you want in your life. And I'm telling you, I'm still trying to get my head around what it means to project a feeling I've never experienced. And the only hope that I have right now of getting my head around that is to think, if I look back at my life and I find the wins, like the first word of the first page of the first chapter of the first book that I wrote. I know what it felt like when I closed that book and I handed the first draft to somebody and went, I'd love your opinion. I know in the last book that I wrote that's been published and released, there were people that read that book in the galley stage when it was just nothing but a PDF file and never been printed yet. And I got a phone call from one guy, and he said, I just want to know what you did to my wife. And I was like, hold up, hang on. I don't know exactly what you're talking about. I don't even know who you are, and I certainly don't know who your wife is. And he went on to tell me, I've been in the field of recovery, helping addicts for almost 2 decades. And I've watched people walk through the psychology of getting free from an addiction and changing their biochemistry and changing their mindset against the addiction. I've been doing it in outpatient clinics for decades. And my wife has struggled with some things that she's had a hard time getting free of. And she was one of your proofreaders. And when he told me her name, I was like, oh, well, I know who that is, but never met her, never had any deep conversations other than here's the next chapter, here's the next pages. We send those back and forth, the proofreading, the thoughts. I don't get this concept. Here's what the word is. You misspelled this. That's been the extent of our conversation. He said, I know. And that's why I'm curious, after decades of understanding my own training and my own relationship with her, we've tried to work through some things that we have not found any success at. But her proofreading your book has changed her life. And I want to know how you did it. That's one of those little wins that sits in the back of my mind and says, okay, if I only wrote that 237-page book for her, I'm good. I win. I'm okay with that. But if I continue to get that kind of feedback, I did have one of those proofreaders that literally met me in the parking lot, handed back the copy of the book and said, "This is too much for me, but I really would like to schedule some time to talk with your wife." About a year and a half later, that same individual called me and said, "Let's have lunch. I want you to understand why your book was so much for me." Life-changing. Complete 180. Completely turned their life around. If I only wrote that book for that person, I win. And I'm okay with that. What I believe I've got to get myself around is, how do I take those two wins, those two successes, the books that have been written in Africa, because of the very first book that I wrote back in 2012. I've seen copies of this book with greasy handprints all over it, pages fluffled out everywhere, laying on the table next to a book of a young man in his 20s who said, "I would have never written this book if I hadn't read that book." I win. That's a success. I want to learn how what Tony does every day can be applied to my life. I'm working on it. I'm working on it. I'm going to start trying to do it more diligently, because that takes hard work. Because like everybody else, I have those bad days. That bill doesn't go through. I didn't pay. I didn't have the success that I expected, and I'm falling apart. But I can't let that emotion of that falling apart moment become the emotion of my day, week, life, decades. And I challenge you to do the same. All right. Are you going to have bad days? Yes. I promise. Someone's going to die. A deal's going to go south. The big win that you had planned is not going to come through. It's going to happen. That's inevitable. The question is, which emotion will you hold on to and project into your future? The win, the first word on the first page of the first chapter of the first book. The win that looked like that one client that you landed and you didn't want to tell anybody because you didn't want to jinx it? Will it look like that when you asked them out for the first date and they said yes, and you went, "Really? Let me run away before you change your mind. I'm not even going to schedule it right now. Just the fact that you said yes is more than I can handle. That's more success than I ever expected in my life. And now that I have it, I don't want to sabotage it or break it or do something with it. So yes, yay! And you escape, right? Rather than diving in, digging in and going, "I love the way this feels. I want to pursue it more." Now, the irony is, as I listen to Tony Robbins and Dr. Peterson in this conversation, the dialogue back and forth about what it takes to actually impress upon the subconscious mind the motivation that draws you to do the hard, uncomfortable, miserable things that precede success. It all starts with a emotional register of what that great win will feel like when you get there. If you can't put those two things together, you're going to run into a lot of troubles. If you can't future cast yourself with, "When I win, it's going to look like this. Success in my financial life looks like this. In my relational life looks like this. In my career, it looks like this. In my education, it looks like this. In the list of accomplishments I want to have before I'm done, to have a trust fund for my kids and grandkids, to have a school or an institute named, whatever it is, if you can't attach a positive emotion to that and say, "This is what it will feel like when that happens," the odds that you'll stay motivated to do it are diminished to almost zero. Now, I challenge you to go find that interview. Just go to YouTube or search Daily Wire. If you're a Daily Wire subscriber, you'll get the whole thing. But there was a great, deep conversation. I'm going to go back and listen again and take more notes, and probably listen again and take more notes, and listen again and compile more notes that I can share with you in my own synthesis of that conversation. But it's so deep and it's so rich by probably two of the brightest minds and the greatest treasures in the idea of self-planned success that have ever walked the face of the earth. Now, they have their own heroes, and that's pretty powerful when you listen to them talk about the people who shaped the way they think. If you consider then the millions of people whose way of thinking has been shaped by the two of them, If you could get your hands around what their success has meant to them and millions of others, you could put that success on your own efforts. You could put that emotion on your own driving motivation. I think as we do that, we become better leaders, because that kind of mentality, emotion, and behavior becomes contagious. Attitude is the only thing in life more contagious than the common cold. You should take a positive attitude with strong emotion into the environment where you lead and inspire people to be better. Tell them better stories of yourself and of them and their future. And tell those stories in a better way so that they're held on to emotionally, mentally, logically, rationally, and they sit in the memory forever. If you need help with that, join Story Power Academy, where we help leaders tell better stories better. I'm Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day.
Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom. I encourage you to go to storypoweracademy.com and check it out. Look at the different classes, the different levels, the different things that are available. You can take a lot of them a la carte. But spend some time there and see if that's the kind of thing that would change the way you communicate as a leader, as a pastor, as a counselor, as a political leader. And if that will help you, I'd love to have a conversation with you. Again, only 10 people in the elite speakers. You will have to apply for that. But if you're a candidate, I'd love to have that conversation with you. I'm Loren Norris with Story Power Academy. I look forward to seeing you inside.